high growth, not a cloud in the sky. Everybody was low unemployment, everybody was manic, everything was, jolly, jolly, jolly. And that's when the bankruptcy happened.
Tomas Sedlacek is macroeconomic strategist and university lecturer. In the next 15 minutes, he talks about how economists reason and the post-crisis economy. Welcome to Backlight Talks.
My thesis is that the economics is not depressed. That's a wrong diagnosis. I think a better diagnosis is the economy is manic depressed. It overdoes its happy periods into manias, and it overdoes its sad periods into depressions. What's important to know, and so the debate that you hear today is we are manic depressed. We are now sort of somewhere in the middle of the depression. And all I hear in all the panels, or almost all the panels that I attend, is give us back our manias. Give us back our unsustainability. The two questions related to that. First of all, to whom is this prayer or wish addressed to? This is some significant other, but you even in very educated Financial Times, we want growth. But from whom? Who is this prayer addressed to? There is some sort of entity we call the markets that we want to give us this manic stage. So that's the first point. We want the manias back. The second point to realize is that both stages are equally dangerous. Of course, manias are much more pleasant for the person who's going through than the depressions, but suicides happen on both ends. And our problem, the Greek problem, is, let's say, the depression, but the kernel of the crisis is in the manias. So let's take a look on Greece and compare it with Ireland, okay? In between the lines, you always read something with which I don't agree is, Greeks are lazy, da-di-da-di-da. If they only worked twice as much as they do, they wouldn't have a problem. And twice as efficiently, they wouldn't have a problem. This is the sort of very politically incorrect, but in between the lines, it's everywhere. Okay, fine. Let's take a look on Ireland. Well, isn't there the case exactly the opposite? Irish bankruptcy was a manic bankruptcy. So there you would have to say, if the Irish, especially bankers or people in the financial industry and mortgage house, if they worked half the time and half as efficiently, they wouldn't have a problem. So and the Irish crisis is the kernel. That is the engine of the problem of the crisis, because that's what happened in America and in Britain. It wasn't that the American economy first slowed down and unemployment went up and da-di-da-di-da, competitiveness went down, and then bankruptcy or near bankruptcy of big banks and companies happened. No, it was the other way around. I mean, it was high growth, not a cloud in the sky. Everybody was low unemployment, everybody was manic, everything was, jolly, jolly, jolly. And that's when the bankruptcy happened. Yeah, it's become a fetish, so to speak. So this is not really a crisis of capitalism proper. That would look differently. This is a crisis of growth. Take, for example, a stupid example of Japan. Japan cannot grow for many decades. One of the theories is that they have hit, let's say, golden ceiling. Everybody already has 2 iPods. And this is, I think we should really look on the Japanese example a lot. These are very clever people. They study like mad. They work like mad. If they lose their jobs, you know what the habit is. 1 week of holiday. I mean, these people are what the rhetoric in Europe is always. You have to be more efficient. You have to da 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 da. No, look at Japan. So they cannot grow. So one explanation is that already everybody has everything. You can't give them nobody wants a third iPhone or iPad or whatever, Android anymore. So they can't grow. Now, what interests me, this is of course only one possible explanation, but what interests me is why, oh why do we take this as bad news? This should be a hallelujah moment. Everybody has everything. Let's relax. That means we don't have to work so hard anymore, and let's chill. But no, this is a problem. This is a crisis that must be addressed. Why? Because we cannot grow. That's the only problem. Even though everybody already has everything, we cannot grow. So it's a little bit like, we're sailing on a ship with the sails and there is no wind. And we're standing now for 4 or 5 years. Sails are flat. Come on. Oh, we wish the growth would, happen, but it's not happening. So maybe after a little while, it's a good idea to say, okay, let's settle down. Let's take a swim. We're not in a hurry anywhere, by the way. Let's make sure that the sick get treated. Let's make sure that the orphans and widows are treated justly. Let's make sure that the people who don't have money don't have to really starve to death. Let's give them some work to do. But let's not think that we need to sink the ship because it's not moving. This is what I have, or this is what I'm thinking. We economists believe in the invisible hand of the market, and this has made it, of course, let many people joke about it. But I believe in the invisible hand, but not of the market. I believe in some sort of coordination hand of the society. So and that is surprisingly strong. I mean, society corrects itself. That's why we're still here, somehow. And it does so in very mysterious ways. So, to give an example, when the body of economics falls down, the markets fail, what happened in 2008, politics come and carry it for a while. Like in a body, if you break your back, your muscle will, create a very strong structure which will prevent you from hurting yourself, etc., etc., etc. So there is some coordination in the society, but why have we sort of stolen that and given that regulatory geniosity or intelligence to markets alone? I don't know. So when we are too economic, too corporate, too rational even perhaps, a generation of hippies will be born. Artists, people that flower power, etc. When they overdo it and there's too much, flower power and too much marijuana everywhere, a new generation will come and say, okay, boys and girls, this is nice, but we do need to have some sort of order. When there is too much of bureaucracy, Kafka will be born. And Kafka will, criticize and teach us that, we shouldn't be just like, or Pink Floyd, which is sort of a musical version of Kafka, if you will. So there is some sort of this, let's even say, dialectics, or perhaps better, dynamics between arts, culture, politics, economics, business, etc., etc. That self-regulates itself. But not just economics. This was I think a stupid mistake to talk about the invisible hand of the market. Why not invisible hand of the arts? Why not invisible hand of the camera people? Why not invisible hand of the shoemakers? Well, because we believe that the only way how to think is to think like an economist. This is what you get in the basic. Any other way of thinking was not reasonable enough. So, you can think like an artist, for example, but that was not a legitimate endeavor for economists. So basically what we did is we limited the reality to a certain sets that we could calculate, that were, hard numbers. And thinking outside of that makes no sense. So giving gifts to an economist, that's why would people give gifts? Why would you tip if you never come back to that restaurant? For an economist, this is crazy. And in economics, it's called a paradox. But this is only a paradox to somebody who studies economics for 3 years. To a normal person that has not been, diluted by economics, of course people give gifts. Rationality always depends on how do you limit it. And we've economists, according to our method, we've limited it too much. And only recently, for example, human capital. Now, when you introduce to an economist and you say, okay, we're giving each other gifts because we're building human capital. Aha, suddenly the economist understands it, but you need to put the word capital into it. So you have organizational capital, cultural capital, human capital, infrastructure. You have to be very slow with us. You need to put the word capital so that we can understand. To me, what's more important than the models themselves, I try to go beyond, and I'm trying to ask what models the models. I mean, what are the models modeled after? So, okay, let me admit, or let me say for a little while, that the models are legitimate, scientific, etc., etc. Even I don't think so, but let's do that. But what are the models modeled after? And that's absolutely random. So for example, to answer your question, in economics, we model our models after physics. So the best way for model to look like is a physics-like model with equations, with causalities that are very deterministic and very mechanical, so to speak, and dead. There's no freedom of choice in economics. This is ironical because we economists happen to believe very often in the freedom of human beings, much more than psychologists who believe that human being is determined by archetypes and some sort of things that move you, that you are not in control of, or sociologists who believe that you are determined by the system, or let's even say biologists who believe that your behavior is determined by genes, and etc., etc. We economists very strongly believe that no, human beings are free, but in our models there is no freedom. Freedom never enters our models. It is a very mechanistic, physics-like sort of approach. Why exactly do we model our models after physics is a question. To answer your question properly, when economics was developing into sort of a respected science, physics accidentally was doing very well. So all the scientists looked upon physics with envy and tried to make their method similar to physics, of which economics, or the field of economics, was most religious believer of sort of the Cartesian mechanistic approach. And so this is the variation of the song, I shot the sheriff, but I did not shoot the deputy. So it's I shot the deputy, but I didn't shoot the sheriff. So you always shoot the middleman. This is sort of the, this is I think from, I don't know which movie it's from, but it's the main sort of lesson to learn from mafias is you always get rid of the middleman. You always deal directly. Yes, of course. And our age, thank God, in a way, makes this available. We don't need so many intermediaries as in the past because of internet and other things. What you see in Greece or in other countries as well is sort of a step back in this process, trying to sort of reverse it, or not back, but maybe continuation of it, to try to exactly get rid of the intermediaries. And it's true that the intermediaries often take the largest bulk of the money. I know this from my stupid little. Well, I wrote a book, and the author gets the least, very small percentage, and most of it is taken by the one who actually caters it. But I'm happy to employ him also, this I must say. I don't think it would work very well if everybody wanted my book that I would sort of come and give it to him, or make him or her come and get it and pay whatever the price would be. So yes, I welcome all these experiments, but they're usually small-scale experiments. The fact of the matter is, and even the most radical proponents, or let's say, for example, Slavoj Žižek, who I think is the most, I'd say, impressive thinker of the left today, absolutely, even he will readily admit that, well, we don't have a functioning alternative. A lot of people on the left criticize the ideology of today, saying, you can't even, it's easier to, and this is what they say very often, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Yes, but this is the problem of also your imagination, I always say. This is up to you to imagine a new system. And whenever intellectuals started imagining new systems, it never really worked very well. So we don't have a full-fledged functioning alternative which could replace capitalism. So this is, I think, one of the great thoughts that Schumpeter had as a philosopher, economist, is that the biggest advantage of capitalism and democracy is that it's not a very good system, but it's the best we have, and it can adopt itself. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be critical.